Hello, welcome to another episode of Writing with Mr. Ruckdashel. Today's episode 7, and we are focused on writing leads. And if you haven't already, get your writing journals out. But of course, you could also use your Google Docs, etc., etc. So today, there's times in my life where I think about how I'm going to do something kind of over and over. You might call it visualization. I know I teach my athletes that visualization is super important. And in my life, there's times where I need to do something and I need to do it really well, or it's something maybe I'm just even nervous about. And I will go over all the possibilities that could happen. I will visualize in my mind exactly how I want it to turn out. I'll see that happen. And then it's amazing how when you're going through that moment later on, you actually can see it unfolding before you. And in some ways, that's what I would kind of call a mind rehearsal. In some ways, that's similar to the work that we're doing today. We are going to take a bunch of different attempts at writing a lead. Now, we're only going to do one together, and I'm going to show you how I kind of get started and a little inspired, but it's going to be your job today to at least get a couple leads done. And these are like rehearsals. We don't know how good each one's going to be when we start off and just get right into it. It might be something that we throw out, and it might be the lead we go with. And it's really important that you don't stick with one lead and write and get it all the way done and go, well, hey, that's the one. I put a lot of work into that one. If anything, after writing a lead for a little bit, if you're starting to get the hang of like, hey, I see how this is going to connect, and like, hey, stop. Let's try a different lead before we marry ourselves to this one lead that we've already worked with. It would be crazy. So today's big idea: writers try out different leads to the story and scenes. And that's important because you have leads for your story, or a lead for your story. But each scene, since it's almost like these 3 scenes we have are stories on their own, each one of them needs to have their own separate lead as well. So the scene that I'm looking at is my scene that I wrote in episode 4, and it's about the colored pencil. And my main character, David, is confronted by Jimmy, who he really looks down upon. Right or not right, it's not for me to decide. However, David does not want to give Jimmy the time of day. And I really tried to make it seem like David is motivated by wanting to be cool and wanting to fit in with friends. And Jimmy is motivated by not having any friends and wanting to have someone who'll notice him, someone who will give him attention. And from there, that creates its own problems and so on and so forth. But whenever we wrote scenes before, we wrote a scene by getting into it. We thought, in the scene, what's the exciting part that has action, a small action, or dialogue? And that was the easiest way to get ourselves into the scene so we could really visualize what was going on. Because if we can't see our scene, how can we expect our reader to? Because we show, we don't tell. So in my scene here, I did my best to start with some small actions, taking a deep breath, gritting his teeth, tongue was poking out of the side of his mouth with concentration. And I eventually work our way to quickly getting a piece of dialogue in there, some thinking, and this confrontation that this first scene is really about. However, we sort of are just thrown into the middle of this classroom. So I know that in my introduction, I need to kind of help us get there a little bit. But like we looked at in our last episode, episode 6, sometimes looking at a mentor text can actually help us to figure out how we start the scene, because that's sometimes the hardest part. So I went back to one of our mentor texts, and I'm going to be honest, this isn't one I normally go to. I went to Raymond's Run at first because I think that's my favorite out of our short stories we read. And I didn't think that was going to work for me. Raven's Run, in the beginning, is really strong with that first person tone, and it is coming from the perspective of Squeaky, and I didn't think that would fit. And I thought I would have a hard time letting that inspire me. So the next one I clicked on, I almost skipped over, but I clicked on it anyways, just thinking, hey, let's see what this one is like. And I've read it before, but it's been a while. And it was Thank You, Ma'am. And I was shocked. I was shocked that it was perfect, that it was third person for me. And I was shocked in how sort of mysteriously it starts. It actually starts by not saying the characters' names to begin with, which I started to try, and then I couldn't do it. So I still tried to keep the same tone. But I want you to realize that when we're starting our intro here, it can be really powerful to look at a previous text, a mentor text. So I encourage you to do the same thing that I've done with the same text or a different text. Could be even your independent reading book, to see how they start a new chapter or start the book. So here is what I looked at in Thank You, Ma'am. It starts with, she was a large woman with a large purse that had everything in it but hammers and nails. Had a long strap, and she carried it slung across her shoulder. It was about 11 o'clock at night, and she was walking alone, when a boy ran up behind her and tried to snatch her purse. The strap broke with the single tug the boy gave it from behind. But the boy's weight and the weight of the purse combined caused him to lose his balance. Instead of taking off full blast as he had hoped, the boy fell on his back on the sidewalk, and his legs flew up. Okay, so I have to say now, knowing that I've already written this piece that I'm about to show you, going back and rereading that again, gosh, I don't think my intro is like that very much at all. But that's not the point. The point is, it inspired me and helped me to think of how I could start my story. And while I may not have stuck super close to this, and you're welcome to stick super close if you want to. You could latch on to this intro and be very similar to it, but for your story, and that would be okay. But you don't have to. You don't have to think, how could I have a sentence that's like, he had a long strap and she carried it, or it had a long strap and she carried it slung across her shoulder. I mean, the thing I would take away from that is that we're making sure we have a clear detail about a super important piece of the scene described, and that's her purse, because she's about to get it stolen. So if you're thinking to yourself, what could I do that's similar? Have a detail that's very described, that's very focused for our reader to see, so we can see it as a reader, if that's going to be important to your story. That's what I would take away. Now, here's my first scene attempt at an introduction. David was the biggest kid in his grade, towering above his peers. In the recess line, little bobbing heads of hair crashed haphazardly into one another before him. Above this ocean of chaos, piercing green eyes scanned down the road like the lamp of a lighthouse. Not only did his size make him seem like a lighthouse amongst the students, but his still body and searching eyes fit the scene. It was as if the little runt of a boy didn't exist who stood behind him. His black mop of hair seemed frozen in time as he glided past the teacher and into the classroom. Mrs. Allison grabbed at her heart. "Oh, I almost didn't see you there, Jimmy. Don't scare me like that." Another reminder that he passed through most school days without gaining anyone's attention. Students milled about grabbing supplies for coloring the desktop ditto. As always, the popular boys were taking their sweet time to get ready. One of the boys was standing on a chair, hands cupped around their mouth, doing their best Joe Buck impression. "He drops back, shakes off a defender, and rockets one for the end zone." Another popular chimed in. "Nice toss, bro. I can't believe it went that far. He jabbed David in the ribs as they walked past. Thanks, replied David in a gentle voice that didn't let on how happy he was to get the attention. Despite his best mouth-biting efforts, a smile burst forth on his face. However, he kept sorting his supplies and soon had taken a seat to begin coloring while the populars threw invisible footballs back and forth. Growing up the son of a school teacher, he was quick to follow directions. Peeking around David to look up towards him, Jimmy stammered, Can I want to borrow one of those pencils, that blue one." All right. And I stopped my scene there because I know I was starting to write over the top of what I'd written previously, and that's totally okay. It's okay to kind of go over part that you've already written before because it's just revision. It's just writing something in a new way, seeing it in a different way. And you might find the way you wrote it this time was better. Ding, ding. I felt that this time was better. Wouldn't you know it? And at this point, in some ways, I went farther than I needed to, but I'm happy with what I wrote. There are some things I already know that I would change about this scene. And later on, if I wanted to edit those things out, I could do that. But now would be the time, if you were me, or if I were you, and I just finished this first scene, introduction. So now I've only got one introduction for scene 1. Now's the time to go back and try a second one. If it was me doing this, I would go to a different short story and do some studying of it to notice what it does. When I looked at that first one from Thank You, Ma'am, I realize now I was thinking a lot about style. I wasn't thinking quite as detailed as far as small. And by that I mean, I wasn't thinking, oh, this sentence is a detail. The next one is about setting. You could do that if you want to, but there are a lot of other things you could focus on. And I kind of leave that up to you. Right now, the thing you should take away from this is that look at a mentor text to see how their introduction goes. Write an introduction for one of your scenes, probably your first one. After you've gotten to the point where you kind of know how to connect it to where you already were in your story, stop. Go back and find a different text to study and try a new introduction. If you get that done before we meet together, you've done a great job. Speaking of things that we need to get done before you meet, here we go. So be prepared to share an intro to your story or an intro to one of your other scenes. So I did say I think it would be best to write an introduction for the beginning of your story for scene 1, but I'll leave that up to you because you know your story better than I do. The other thing that you should get done today, not that you'll need it for sharing, is 2 different introductions. And I've said that quite a bit, but this is just a reminder. At least 2 different introductions for one scene. I didn't say 2 different introductions for 2 scenes. 2 introductions for one scene. And finally, before our next lesson, which will be this coming Friday, and episode 8, and we'll be taking a look at how we write endings. Before that point, we should have at least 2 different introductions for each scene. Not that we're going to use them. We're only going to use 1 introduction for each scene. But if we get to that day and we've done that work, then I'm betting you'll know which one of those introductions for each scene is best. We want to come into our next episode with a story that we feel like is getting to the point of being done. Since we haven't focused on the ending at all, you can bet we're going to be wrapping some things up. And when we finish with that ending, that will finish with our series of fiction writing. And there's a lot more things that we could do. And if we move on to doing fantasy later in our series of writing episodes, you can bet that we'll build on some of this work we've already done and add more. Okay? Thanks for joining me today on Writing with Mr. Ruckdashel, episode 7, Writing Leads. I hope that you enjoyed today's time together and that you're super productive in writing all of those leads. I can't wait to hear them in our Zoom. Thanks. Peace.